that recording. Awesome. So thank you for coming. You are here just in case for weeding our North Shore School District libraries. Many of this or much of this will be a repeat or information you already have, potentially just a different way to think about how we can maintain weeding in our library or how we might do it differently based upon the way in which our populations, our communities, and our collections are changing over time, including budget. Fortunately for this year, there is no change, as far as I know, to our per student allocation, which is fantastic. North Shore School District does an excellent job of, and has done for some time now, of committing to understanding that library materials need to be paid for every year. We could always use more, but let's take what we've got and do what we can. I did just break it to somebody. This might be the first time you know this or have heard this, but that we did lose our graphics department. They apparently fell victim to district cuts. And so some of you, if you were planning to use our graphics department, maybe check into that, because I'm pretty sure they got cut. Sad news, but let's move on. My name is Rebecca Weinkoop, for those of you who don't know me. I have been a teacher librarian for the last 23 years, and I've worked in both independent and public schools. This is my second year in the North Shore School District. The largest bulk of my experience was in both middle schools and elementary schools in Seattle Public Schools. I have a few different ways in which you could join me in community on social media. I have both my own personal, more professional or personal Instagram account at Mrs. Weinkoop. I have a Frank Love Library Instagram account if you want to see specifically what's happening in this library. I have a TikTok, a YouTube channel, Twitter, X, which I'm not really using much anymore. And of course, you can always email me at my North Shore email, even though that was my Gmail. So today's conversation is really going to be about weeding. What is it? Why do we do it? Collection analysis, setting goals, running reports. We're going to get a chance to dig into some data, some district-wide data for North Shore schools. We're going to make a plan and talk about how we can best communicate what we're doing and why when it comes to weeding our North Shore library collections. Pause for just a minute in case somebody thinks they're in the wrong spot. You can ask me questions, get clarification before we move forward. Okay. Well, I thought it might help us to maybe just start with a really brief overview of kind of what the different schools of thinking are. There's a lot of commonality between the four that I'm going to present to you today, and they're all presented in different ways. So the first thing is, when you have this slide deck, each one of these links here will take you to the larger collection development policy or write-up that has been offered as a framework here today. The first is Jen Lagarde. She's known as the Library Girl. She's out of Olympia, Washington. And I love, she uses and has adapted the FRESH model. I'm not always a big fan of acronyms just because they change constantly and we can never keep up. But I do love that this helps me think through the choices we make when we're reading and can help us create a plan. Does it foster a love of reading? Does it reflect your diverse population? Does it reflect an equitable global view? Does it support the curriculum? I'm going to pause there for a minute because I'm not saying that means we should have every one of the books listed in our reading curriculum, because we are actually not curriculum centers. We are school libraries serving students and teachers. But it is important to look at the clarification. Our collections should be aged and developmentally appropriate. That supports the curriculum. And they should support the learning goals of our schools, not the same as specifically which titles are mentioned in our curriculum. And as most of us know, even though our newer English language arts reading curriculum is better than most. Still, anytime you're buying a boxed curriculum, it doesn't necessarily keep up with the publishing industry and student interests and needs. And finally, is it a high quality text? One of the most recent examples for me personally, I did a huge weed last year. My first year at Frank Love, Stephanie Persine did an amazing job with this collection. And sometimes it just is a second set of eyes. If you've developed and maintained your own collection, having an outside perspective can be really, really helpful in seeing things you don't always see. Well, I went through and I weeded, pulled a couple thousand books out of the library. And then even just this last spring, I was like, wait, why did I keep all of those eyewitness books? Most of those eyewitness books were published in the early 90s. They're definitely out of date. They are not the highest quality of text because they don't reflect the unique and diverse needs of our current learners. The font is really small. Things are squished on the pages. The pictures are outdated. Even the covers look like 80s clip art that we did maybe in Word when we were younger. So I went through even this last spring after a big giant weed and started again and pulled all of those eyewitness books. So high quality text is a great thing to think about as well. The ALA policy is fairly vague, right? It's this big umbrella organization that's giving us information, but that the weeding should be guided by policies, determined which should be removed, regular inventories. Obviously, none of this actually addresses or helps to contend with maybe the time constraints that we might have, the assumption that we just have time to do weeding, whether we have a library assistant, which some of our elementary schools do, whether we have additional FTE, that also is a factor. So all of that comes into play for sure. In Northshore School District, I think I'm gonna actually have to close my window, was hoping for fresh air. Hold on a moment. In Northshore, reasons for weeding: providing space for more current items, removing out-of-date information to improve the relevance of the collection, relevance to our students and to our curriculum, students and staff needs, locate things that need to be repaired, sure, give feedback on strengths and weaknesses of the collection. These are all things that most of us are already doing. And there's no way I could possibly know what you're doing in your library. Only you know, and hopefully your admin knows what you're doing in your library and working towards some, if not all of these factors. And then I don't know if y'all are familiar with Kelsey Bogan. Kelsey Bogan has a blog and is very, very active on social media. And I just loved that she says it like it is. If you want to make big changes via weeding, you're going to have to be unemotional and ruthless, and ruthlessly aggressive with it. Decide on your goals, decide on your criteria, and stick to it. It's so difficult sometimes when we have been working really hard to build a collection, when we're spending taxpayer dollars, when we're trying to build a library that reflects the needs of our students and staff, to realize that maybe something is out of date now, and maybe it didn't get read, or didn't get read very often, or didn't get used. That can be hard, right? But it's important. It's still important nonetheless to plow on, move ahead, and make sure that we're working on our collections. So here's where we're going to pause, and I'm going to ask you all to go into, and we're going to do it now because I want you to be able to come back to it later. So once we all pop in and are working on running our analyses, we're going to get dropped in the queue, and then they're slowly going to add. So if you did a collection analysis in the spring of 2023, so just when school ended, you do not have to do this. You can if you want to, if you've been genrefying your collection, if you've been weeding this summer, if you've added a bunch of new books, then yeah, run another analysis because you want to make sure you scoop those up. But I'm going to hop out really quickly, and I'm going to go to give you a direct example. So from my Clever portal, we want to be in back office. So make sure you hop into back office, log in, and then on the top menu, the first thing you're going to choose is catalog. On the left-hand menu, you're going to choose tidal wave, catalog, tidal wave. And then right here, this blue button, submit your collection analysis. Please do that now. If you have not, I'm number 5 in district, which means some of you hopped in front of me. That's great. So go ahead and do that. And we're going to just let that sit there because it's going to take a while. We have a lot of libraries. We have almost 15 of us present today. So that's going to take a little bit. So now that we have started our analysis, I wanted to just dig into some of the key features of the collection analysis that Follett provides, just as a way to start to think about, one, if you're not going to weed your entire collection, which is a huge task, or if you're going to weed your entire collection, how can you chunk it? What smaller sections could you target? What could guide that target? Where do you need to look for weeding options? So here is the Frank Love analysis from this spring. And on the left-hand side, you can see that this is the top part of that analysis. And it currently says we have 414 students. So I need to go in and I need to edit my student population to be, we're almost at 500. Of course, we were staffed at 499 students. And so that's going to change my per student allocation, right? Items per student currently is 20.8. When I add in, 86 more students, that's going to change. Our collection size is 8,631. Later on, you'll note that that's print materials. There are another 2,000 some odd digital materials that we all have access to through Sora that pop in, and we'll look at that too. But that changes the dynamic just a little bit because all of those books show up in all of our catalogs. The average age for Frank Love's collection is 2013, which is not a terrible place to be. I think that's a great target, but you'll see that even, a nice, big, fat, juicy 10 years out average age doesn't mean there's nothing that needs to be done. And there's always work. In fact, looking at my collection, we'll look at the big dig down numbers later. I have a ton, like 4,000 of my books were published in the 2010s. And so that means the next 5 years, things are really going to start to age. Like a larger percentage of my collection is going to age, and I need to deal with that or prepare to deal with that. Looking at aged titles. So there's this really cool piece when you get into the collection analysis where it says it says 22% of my collection with an average age of 2013 still has 22%, almost a quarter of this collection is considered aged, based on criteria outlined by Follett, but it's still a good guide nonetheless. I know that we can debate time and again whether we agree with the criteria, but they're a guide. It's not an absolute. When you are in this collection analysis, those blue numbers right below that 22% allows you to click on it and view those items. Pretty slick. And then you can see 31% are 2018 or newer. Just touch points for this collection analysis. And at the very bottom of this analysis, you can look at what percentage of your collection qualifies as diverse or SEL titles and the average age and percentage of the collection. So the average age of my diverse titles is the same as my entire collection. My SEL materials are a little bit newer. The thing that I want to kind of warn you about, that the criteria that is being used for that diversity analysis relies on how robust our MARC records are. And in my experience, for whatever reason, I've been talking with Beth about this, our catalog records, our subject headings are not as robust as other districts. So I feel like right now in Northshore, based upon those MARC records, our diversity analysis, that percentage is low based upon what I've added this year and where I feel like we are. But I think that comes from the robustness of our MARC records. I'm going to pause there and pop out and just show you, not just in screenshots, but just making sure that everyone has seen this. So again, if you want to access your catalog records or your analyses, catalog, tidal wave, library materials, and then up under my account, I have title-wise analyses. You can see I analyze my catalog about every month. And so here's the last one I did in June. There we go. And here's all of this information in just a different format. And I'll give you a look at the aged titles. If you click on that link, you can export as Excel. This is a pretty slick and powerful tool. One thing you could do, just start with your age titles. Export this Excel spreadsheet, open it, and sort it. For example, if I download, if it will let me right now. There it goes. There's my collection analysis. If I open this, you get this giant spreadsheet. You can hop in and you can take out all of this stuff. And there's so much information here, right? But nuts and bolts of things, we want years, titles, authors, and call numbers, or I mean barcodes. I'm going to get rid of those. So now here I have this larger list, right? This is just the aged titles. And you know, some of our libraries, I'll show you in a little bit, we'll look at some data together. Some of our libraries have a large percentage of materials that are aged. And so this could be where you start. So you could start by sorting by call number, right? These are currently sorted by call number. You could start by sorting by age. If you wanted to first sort by age, right? And then by call number, we could start by publication year, and then we could add after that, we could add call number. So if I just wanted to know, my oldest stuff is going to show up at the bottom or at the top right now, right? And then within that, it's sorted by call number. So just a pretty slick way to dig in with a very basic, you've already done this report. It's if you've submitted your collection for analysis, you have access to that aged title. Pause there for just a second, see if anyone has any questions. We talk a little bit about like our own personal connections to our collections. The oldest book in my library currently is the Dulair's Book of Greek Mythology. It's an amazing book. My son is 21 now. He read it 15 million times over, loved Greek mythology. I still have kids checking this out regularly. And there haven't been, right? There really haven't been books that have replaced it to that same extent as far as readability and access and images. And so we still have that book here because it's still relevant. So that's something that I'm keeping, right? But I also recognize that I have a personal attachment to it. My son's connection and our familiarity with it is part of the factors, right? That went into me making a decision about this book, knowing one that if I want to, I could talk about it and kids read it, but they're already reading it. I can look at a particular item and see that our cheetah readers are still reading that. So I'm going to pop in and see, we've got a couple of here. Let me just double check I'm just checking the chat. What if the average age of the collection is 2008? Jenna, what What can you expand on that question? Do you want to know if that's good or bad?
Well, so I pulled my analysis and I did a big weed like you did last year, and I actually double checked, but it says the average age of our collection is from the year 2000. And there's a ton of books that are not moving in the library, but I feel like I weeded so much last year that I'm taking this huge dent, but I don't see any, and I'm bringing in books, quality books, but I don't see it making a huge dent.
Yeah. So a couple of things. One, if you're new, Jenna, relatively new to your library, there can be hidden items, hidden items in your analysis that you don't know about. So one of the first things I did is I looked specifically at this link to aged titles. And then I went back and looked at it. And I would say of my initial list, about half of my aged titles were not physically in my library. And so that was an indication to me that I had to unfortunately go back manually and look more closely at why that was happening. And so that would be one thing I would say is start with those aged titles and start looking how much of that is actually on your shelf. Did somebody do a big weed and they forgot to pull stuff out of the catalog? Was there a move and 3 boxes got lost? Like there's so many reasons that could change. Here's the other thing, like actually moving the needle on a collection, average age is slow and tedious work. So allow yourself the grace for that to move slowly, because it just does. When you're looking at, our collections in Northshore are somewhere between like 8,000 and 20,000 items, right? And so it can be really hard to get that needle to move, and there's lots of reasons for that. Colette, I will look into student enrollment, but I'm pretty sure it's in the profile. I'll have to go back and double check that, but I can do that in a little bit, as far as changing your student enrollment. Okay. Excellent. Any other questions before we move on? All right. Okay, so this is where we're going to take some time and we're going to dig into some of the reports that you can run. And for future reference, right? This is for if, we sit together today, we're here for an hour and a half, which is not a lot of time to really dig into this kind of thing. And you're like, oh, wait, Rebecca talked about that report we can run. On the left-hand side, there are links here, both number 1 and number 2 videos that I have created and posted on YouTube that will walk you back through these processes. So I don't want you to think you have to remember right now, if you haven't done reports on these 2 things, what that would be. So the first would be a report of nonfiction specified call number with a specified call number range. So one of the things to think about is that our goals for weeding will determine what reports you want to run. Doesn't do you much good to have to take a bunch of fiction out if you've run a full collection analysis, to take a bunch of fiction out if you're not going to tackle your fiction. So if you want to start, one way you can start, maybe you commit to 100 numbers of Dewey Decimal per month. You start with your zeros to your 100s, your 100s to 200s in October, your 200s to 300s in November. And by the time you get to the end of school year, you've hit every section of your nonfiction collection. So that would be potentially one way that you can chunk this. I also want to recognize, even though I mentioned it earlier, the elephant in the room, that we all have different staffing levels. We all have different numbers of sections that we're teaching. We all have different admin that are assigning us different roles in our building. And so the pull on your time is only you can decide how to manage that once you're in this position where you're maintaining this collection, and we have to figure out how we get it done with the time and the resources that we have. So right now, what I have for you is this basically step-by-step instructions here that are going to help you through running a report. So what I'm going to do is just run through the nonfiction one first, and we will go ahead and look at that together. So if I'm in the catalog, now I want to go up to reports, and I'm just going to walk you through this. Again, there's step-by-step directions. You're going to click on library reports. And then for nonfiction, the shelf list is a really great place to start. So now here's where you can set the range. So if you choose 001 to, oops, and you got to include your letters in the front, AAA, to, let's say, generally our 100 and 200s are smaller than most of the collection. Nothing compared to our 500s. Let's go all the way up to, maybe we'll go to 199, easy, which is the end of that section, right? And then you get to choose, after you do that, how you ask Destiny to manage or what you want to sort as, right? So the next thing that you're going to do is you're going to count circulations from how far back, right? My kind of hard and fast rule is if it hasn't circulated in, you choose 3, 5 years, I'd get rid of it. So if I go 5 years back, today's date is 08/23, and then 5 years back, 2018 to today, right? And I save that. So I'm counting circulations between those two time periods. And then I include circulations from in-library use. So did you pull it and use it for a class? Did you put it on display? Did a kid pick it up and leave it on the shelf? All of those get counted as in-library use when you scan them back in to your circ. And that's important information to have. I haven't had a need to use the date acquired. So I don't use that. I choose the publication year because I want that to be included. And I want my output to be as a Microsoft Excel. Okay. So all of that, again, in this slide deck, I'm going to run that report. And it's pending, which is great. I like to sit here and click refresh. So now that I have that shelf list, here's my shelf list. I'm going to open it. It's going to drop in Excel again. And so here's one of the ways in which I have used this before. I don't need my data acquired. I'm not really worried about right now about sublocation or about status, excuse me. So I'm going to get rid of those. And the first thing I want to do is I want to sort by circ, right? So if I hop in and I sort by circ, because I want to get rid of the books I know I'm not going to get rid of. If I have a book, honestly, the easiest way to do this for me is like 2 or less circs, probably something in the last 5 years, something I want to consider getting rid of. If a book's not circulating more than once a year, right? Is that something that you either want to replace or just remove, right? Either one can happen, replace or remove. So for me, I could target based upon this information. Here's my zeros, right? Here's my ones. Let's just include our twos, right? I'm not going to delete a book that was published in 2021 because it hasn't had a chance to circulate. I probably honestly wouldn't do anything 2018 or newer, right? So because I want to give it time. Some of the ones potentially I might consider for weeding would be, well, this one's a definite. The first computers, got to go in there and double check, especially with our technology. The average age should be 5 years on our technology and our science related stuff. So I have some choices, but that's one way in which I would go in and sort that to make it easier to use. And that was just running that very first basic nonfiction report. And again, this is just my 0s to 199s. You can make this as big as you want, but being able to chunk it is really, really helpful. Go ahead and pause and see if there's any questions. I know this is a lot.
I have a question. What about books that didn't circulate before 2018?
So for example, like this one here, the very first one, Smart Online Searching from 2016 has 0 circs. I would get rid of that. I haven't yet, but now that I've run this report, that would be one I would get rid of. I will tell, yeah, go ahead.
Weren't your parameters that it was a book that was checked out between August 23rd, 2018 and this year?
Yeah.
So anything that circulated or anything that didn't circulate before that,
right,
would show up here?
Right. So because what I'm looking at is books that have been on the shelf in the last 5 years and how many times they've been checked out or borrowed. And so if I have a book from 2016 that hasn't been checked out at all, I can get rid of that. Right here, I have a book from, this is one I would look at, a book from 2010. It's now 13 years old, right? Kid's Guide to Aliens has only checked out 4 times in the last 5 years. So that is also one that's probably one that I would look for a replacement for, because I know that probably has more to do with the format of the material than it does with the content, because I have kids check out alien stuff all the time. So it kind of depends on how you get to set your parameters. That's the advantage to our collection development policy. You know your students in your community best. You know what books are used, for example, for class projects and things. You know your budget and how you're spending it. You know if you have supplemental budget for book fairs or Northshore Schools Foundation things. All of those are factors in what we're doing. But the good news is it means that everything down here, all these big circs down here, we can eliminate those from the report. You don't have to, I mean, unless you choose to, you don't need to weed stuff that's still circulating frequently. Does that help, Kathy?
Yeah, so I was just realizing, so it doesn't not include the books that haven't been checked out since 2018. Those just show up as zeros.
Yes, they just show up as zeros.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, yep. Okay. Keeping an eye on our chat and moving along. So the next piece would be fiction. The report I have here, I'm showing you for 2 reasons. It says a report for fiction that's specified by genre. My understanding is about half of our elementaries, maybe half of our middle schools, and I'm not sure about high schools in North Shore have begun to genreify fiction. And the advantage to genreifying fiction there are a number of advantages to genreifying fiction. And I know that in our meeting with librarians on Monday, we're going to have an opportunity to talk a little bit more about that in more depth, but it allows you again to chunk your reading. For me, I know that my fantasy, for example, is gigantic, and it's still not circulating as much as I would like it to. So, or as much as I would expect it to. So fantasy for me is something that I would tackle. So let me just really quickly, you also don't have to do this. I'll show you both ways, whether it's a genreified collection or not. And so let me just show you really quickly what that would look like. Again, these step-by-step instructions are here. This is, even though it's me talking a lot, really intended to be an opportunity for you to dig into the catalog, to run some of these reports, to look at this. So if you are listening to me in the background, but you're staring at your Excel spreadsheet and you're sorting that and working through that, go for it. That's also why we'll have the recording and the slide deck available for you after, because I know how hard it is when you want to get started on something and not everything's applicable. You still want to be able to come back to it. So for the fiction report, I'm going to start in reports. I'm going to go back to library reports, and this time I'm going to go down to statistics and look for collection statistics historical. And when I do that, I'm going to set that same circ range, right? From 8/23/2023 to today. Oops, sorry, I did the numbers wrong. That's today. And this one we're going to make 2018. So I'm looking for total circulations. I want it to count how many times something has been used in the last 5 years, right? That's what this number is looking for. And then I want to show title and copy details. And I want to include call number and prefix. Oops, sorry, I did that wrong. Copy category. That's what we want, because this is for that genreified collection. I'm going to show you this first. So then you're only going to show copies. Now this is a little bit different than the last one. Copies with this allows us to limit it to, we want to show copies with less than, let's say we want less than 2 circulations in the last 5 years. That's what this is set to. And then because I said all copy categories, I can look in, these are all my genreified sections, and I can say, I just want fantasy. And now I can limit this report only to fantasy. And again, always choose export as Excel, because that allows you to get in there and dig into that information. Okay, and then I could run that report. Let's hop back up real quick. Let's go back to call number and prefix. If you're not genreified, but you want to do fiction, right? Your prefix is F, AAA, and maybe you say, because you're not genreified, but you want to make this more manageable, you want to run this report through fiction, say DDD, right? It's going to capture all your authors A through D, same, less than 2 circs in the last 5 years. And then you want to export as Excel. Those are 2 different ways you could run reports for fiction. Any questions on that? I'm hoping y'all are a quiet group, because I'm maybe covering things that you're already familiar with, but don't hesitate to use the chat or pop in and ask questions if you've got them.
Question.
Yeah.
At the elementary level, how much are you reading, or excuse me, trying to balance on, I don't want to say leveled books, being like easier reads, like the ones that only really are well-read 5th graders are going to read. Those are so easy to collect because those are really good books. But how much are you looking at, like how many shelves of reading that a lot of your elementary school kids can't access do you want to keep? Or how do you, what's your
what
filter?
what percentage of the collection you would want?
Oh, not necessarily hard numbers, but it's so easy to go through the shelves like, oh, these are really good books. You know, this is Aragon, this is a nice thick book. But it's hard not to have a lot of really thick books, especially in maybe fantasy. That you're really looking at that, you know, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and even a lot of 5th graders, you know, pandemic, post-pandemic, aren't really accessing yet. They're more likely to read in middle school. So, I mean, how do you weigh that on your keeping a lot of those big, thick ones on your shelves?
Some of it's space, right? So there's a couple of different schools of thought as far as that's concerned. I would say that, you know, my fantasy section, like I said, is really full, and there's a lot of, I'll tell you, Aragon is not circulating in our library. That's a really good example of an amazing book, but one I would consider, maybe there's some Claribel Ortega that has replaced that, or, you know, what maybe more diverse authors or what newer titles could replace that are following more up-to-date publishing guidelines as far as shorter middle grade fiction, larger font, those kinds of things. You can also look at, there's a lot of research into students who are struggling readers being able to access a text easier if it shows up if you buy the large print versions of books. There's like lots of ways you could attach it or attack that. And I don't know that anything's hard and fast. Kelsey Bogan, I mentioned earlier, she has a thing that she's coined dynamic shelving. And if you are unfamiliar with dynamic shelving, the idea is that pretty much none of us look for books by their spine. And so as often as possible, when we can turn books spine or face out, right, whether it's in a bin and we're shuffling through it, whether it's on a display, whatever that happens to be, when we can use dynamic shelving techniques, that kids are going to, one, find books easier and maybe be more engaged in that book selection process. The thing that dynamic shelving requires is room on the shelf to turn books face out. Yeah. So there's that. I'll be honest, I see a time in the very near future where we're not going to have Harry Potters on our library shelves, right? Like we're getting to that point for a lot of different reasons for that particular set and series. But being willing to kind of let go of rate books for an eye towards what do students want? What are they going to read? You know, the my mystery section, for example, it took out all of the Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys, not reading them, not touching them. They're outdated. I don't have any Beverly Cleary in my life.
Oh, but some of those are coming out as graphic novels, which is kind of fun, right? And they're touching that way.
Right. So there's going to be lots of different touch points or different ways for students to access these amazing stories, because publishers are recognizing that our kids read differently. They interact with text differently. You know, a lot of multimodal text features, even in fiction, are, you know, that's kind of like your Wimpy Kid or the 8-Bit Warriors Minecraft series, like where there's little bits and pieces kind of surrounding the text, are engaging the brains of today's readers differently than they were before. And so I think it's, one, give yourself grace, right? Like you can make rules for your weed and change them, but I would just say also allow yourself the opportunity to just be harsh with it. I have been in a number of libraries in my career. This is my 5th library. And oftentimes I've also sat on 2 design teams when we're building new libraries, and architects, admin, central office will walk into your library. They'll look at your really full shelves and they'll go, oh, you don't need any more. You have what you need. The truth of the matter is, 1, if our collection is circulating, we should have empty shelves. And 2, if we have the right size collection for our students and we've been allotted the right amount of linear footage, we should also have space on our shelves so that we can turn those books out facing, so that our little tiny fingers of our smallest patrons can get in and find those dog books that they love when there's 20 of them on a shelf. But if there's 60 of them on a shelf, it's almost impossible for them to navigate that. So those kinds of things too impact how much we weed. And that's why, like, my suggestion, if it's uncomfortable, and I know it is, I've done it, right? If we are like afraid to do it, then we kind of sometimes just need to give ourselves permission to do it, right? Take advantage of, like, I'm one of your library liaisons at the elementary level. Take advantage of the secondary folks, like run it by them. If you're not sure, go ahead and ask. I'm on social media like a lot professionally. And so I'm bouncing things off of people and asking questions and learning that way as well. It can be kind of scary, but there's lots of room. And I mean, let's be honest. The truth of the matter is, if you get rid of something and 6 months down the road, a kid asks for it, if I have it, I'll loan it to you. somebody like we have a great library system in Northshore. And so I really truly believe that even if that happened and somebody wanted something, like somebody came and asked for Beverly Cleary the other day, and I said, I'm sorry, we don't have any Beverly Cleary in our library. That I just said, but I can help you get them. Let's talk about, I can ask for them from other libraries. Let me point you towards Libby. Let's look at Sora. All of these other places where things might be available. We pop into the chat too. Yeah, thanks, Jenna, for answering that question in the chat. Okay. We also already talked about the aged titles, which is the final report here that I talked about. Any other questions before I move forward? Yeah, full doesn't mean good. You're right. It doesn't. And there's a lot of reasons. Also, I think about in the elementary and even in the middle school libraries, if they can't reach it, it's inaccessible, right? In my library, even though I have 5 shelves, I don't put anything except display on the top shelf because kids can't reach it. So how do we make space and accessibility part of those? Oh, good question, Carla, about should it be 50-50? That kind of depends on your community, right? It also depends on the age. At the middle school and high school level, for me, I'd skew way more, I'd maybe skew 75% fiction, 25% nonfiction, because most of the research that high school students are doing is going to be online, right? And so what you can get is high interest narrative nonfiction or the high interest nonfiction, but it's going to be a smaller percentage. It depends on who you're serving. In our school, at my school, we're closer to 50-50, I think I haven't looked recently, 60-40. But I would say, take a look at what has circulated. What are the most popular books in your building? And I'll show you real quick, just because this is a really great aside from thinking about what is circulating and what's not, just in case you don't know where this information is. This is a really quick and dirty way to get some information. If you are in circulation, and I'm sorry, this is not a part of my presentation, or at least not on a slide deck. If you're here, down here at the bottom on the left-hand side, there's this library information tag. There is a wealth of information at your fingertips without running any reports. The first is the statistics tab. If you click on that, it tells you how many books are currently checked out. We did continuous summer checkout this year, so I have lots of books checked out. It shows you how many titles you have and how many copies. It shows you how many patrons. And then down here are the snapshots. The snapshots are so cool because I could choose, let's say I want to see for the last 12 months, right? Because I want to see by month. If I click go, now I get a month by month, total circs, total holds. Super quick and dirty, really fast way to look at those statistics, which I think is super helpful. In addition, there's top patrons and top titles right here on the top and bottom titles. You can run this all the way to 50, and you can run it for the past year, right? And you can just update that. You can limit by call number if you want. And you could see what are the most popular nonfiction. What are the most, some of this is skewed if you have multiple copies of things like Wimpy Kid and Dogman show up a lot in my list because I have multiple copies of those. But those are some really great, quick ways to gather information as you're kind of setting your parameters or your goals for the weeding that you're going to do. Okay, let me pop down. I saw us flip a couple of questions. Oh, I love that Jenna turned her top shelves into chalkboards. That's awesome. Like chalkboard paint, Jenna?
Annie and I used, it's actually an adhesive. I got it on Amazon because they were like, you can't paint anything. And we were like,
Oh,
hey, we want to do what we want to do. So we got chalkboard adhesive. So if we get in trouble, fine, we'll peel it off. And then I just got new chalk. We tried to use regular chalk and it really was kind of crumbly and messy, but we put it up above some of our nonfiction, that's where our tallest shelves are.
Mhm.
And we're going to put like poetry, or if it's women's history, we're going to like
Sure.
decorate it out and use it as
Yeah.
display space and whatever. But if anyone's interested, I'll send a picture once Annie and I get the
Cool.
right.
Have you ever used the chalk pens?
I didn't know if it would come off this
Oh.
adhesive. So I
Ah.
want to do like a sample before I
Oh, that's a
draw
good idea. Yeah, I have these old slates that I got. Like they're literally like our whiteboards now, but they're slates that somebody was giving away and buy nothing. And I use them for like display. And I use those chalk markers and they're so much fun.
Oh, yeah. Well, we're hoping to have a good time with it. So
Yeah, that's really cool. I love that idea. And what a great way to add like display space and context for kids with the collection to be able to write on that. That's really cool. Okay. District-wide statistical analysis. Okay, here's the meat and potatoes of this. I want to start by being very clear. Sharing this information with you is not intended, nor do I want this to make anyone feel less than, or feel shameful, or feel embarrassed, or feel all higher and mighty than because of the data that you're going to look at. I want to remind everybody that every single one of our libraries are different. Our day-to-day is different. Our staffing is different. Our funding, even though we all have that per pupil allocation, the funding is different based upon the populations we serve. I have mid-level blended, FSA, and EAP all in our building. I don't get more money for that. I have to use the same amount of money for providing library materials for all of those populations, right? So all of those factors factor into our collections, right? And how often we can get to them. Some of us have been on leave, like that's normal, right? That happens. Some of us are new to our buildings. All of these things are factors for what we're going to share with each other. So if you have the presentation open, if you don't worry, there is a link. This is the link to a really big document. This document has all of our schools on it. And down at the bottom, you can see that it's going to give us, this one is an overview. This is nonfiction percentage, nonfiction average age, nonfiction number of titles. Like there's so much data here. I totally geek out over this and I love it. And it really helps me provide perspective. It helps me set goals. It helps me think about how I can impact those numbers maybe more directly. Some of the things that I think are super interesting are the number of titles by decade. I mentioned earlier, for example, that most of my books, a large percentage of my books are in the 2010s, which means I'm right around the corner from half my collection falling into that aged category. How do I plan for that? How do I prepare for that? What can I do now to help mitigate that? All of those questions are part of this. So if you have my document open, if you used the link that I put in the chat earlier, you can use that. If I'm gonna, hold on, I'll answer your question, Heidi, in just a second. I'm gonna drop the link to that Google Sheet also in the chat. I wanna give you 10 minutes to just look through this. Look at yourself, look at other, if you're in high school, look at other high schools. And we're going to just walk through a protocol that asks us what catches our eye, what can we celebrate, and what do we want to work on. So Heidi, you asked what does this pull from? If you go all the way back to the beginning under overview comparison, one of the things it tells you is what's the analysis date. So that will tell, because it's different for every building, but that's what it's based on, is the last analysis. Thank you for asking that question. Okay, so I'm gonna set my timer. We're gonna do 10 minutes. If you please open this document, start poking around. And again, thinking about what catches your eye, positive or negative. What do you want to celebrate and what can we work on? Okay, 10 minutes. And of course, as you're digging through, if you have questions, you can pop them in the chat, or you can turn your mic on and just ask. got about 4 minutes left. I just wanted to check in and make sure, I didn't know if you all saw it on my slide, that the average age of our North Shore school libraries, collectively K through 12, is 2007. And the average items per student is 18. All right. So that's our 10 minutes, 10 minutes of digging in. You have access to this. We're also, hopefully you'll join us on Monday for additional look at, or additional training. We're going to be together on Monday. It'd be great to see you. I'm going to go ahead and answer our text box here real quick, because I would love to hear what you found. What positive, negative, things to celebrate, things you noticed. I noticed that Denise mentioned in the chat that the age sensitive ranges are odd. They're odd. I'd have to ask Beth or maybe Tommy why that is. I'm not 100% sure what who set those parameters. A lot of this is set by Follett. So that would be something that I would have to look into. What other things did you see or notice?
So I have a question also about the age sensitive thing. So is that call numbers?
Those are call numbers. Yeah. So within that
It's nonfiction.
range. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. What are some celebrations? What did you see that made you go, great?
Okay, I was afraid that mine were going to be way off from the other middle schools, and actually we're all pretty close on a lot
Okay.
of things. So that's a relief.
Yeah.
And I noticed, I'm Carolyn from Bothell, and
Uh-huh.
the three older high schools are very similar, but North Creek, and this does not surprise me because I was there unboxing everything, way more fiction heavy, which I
Mhm.
think is appropriate. I wish I was more fiction, you know, like I feel like all my purchases are fiction, mostly fiction. I just weeded basically almost all of my reference because it was so old and it was not getting used. And I was kind of surprised. I was hoping the age would go down a little bit, but as history teachers, we just have a lot more. I mean, as high school libraries, we just have a lot more older books and things like that. And I would say Woodinville, Bothell, Inglemoor are very similar. North Creek stands as very fiction heavy, which is interesting.
Yeah, and I think some things are changing too, right? In the collections we choose to provide for our students, right? And I think philosophically a lot of that has changed. Are students still coming to our high school libraries to check out independent reading that are those older, generally maybe were more academically oriented type of materials, or are they coming to our libraries and looking for the newest Brandon Sanderson, right? Or Angie Thomas's book, or Nick Stone? Like, what do we need to do, or are there things we need to change potentially to shift the service model, I guess? And it depends, right? You all know your high schools certainly better than I do. And so that, I think, is kind of one of the things that is shifting over time, that school libraries are becoming less about supporting the curriculum and instead helping build the reading lives of our students.
Yeah. Our AP teachers have certain required reading lists.
Right.
And what I've noticed is I have a lot of those books. I need to replace them with just like
Yeah.
nicer looking versions of them, because some of them are just getting yellowed and, they're old.
Yeah, you're right.
They are still reading them in the AP classes, but
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah, no, you're right. Well, and also, like, I don't know, are our high schools, do you have book rooms versus like, are we using in my previous experience, like core content for classrooms, like class sets or multiple copies were housed in the resources tab of Destiny Discover, so that you could run a report just about the collection itself, not about the curricular piece of it. And so I just don't know how that's done in North Shore, and that can impact things as well.
Hey, Rebecca.
Yeah.
So in reference to the age sensitive odd categories, I actually did a little digging, and if you dig through those Dewey categories, like 003 to 007 is going to be your computer sciences,
Right.
and like that. Those technologies and stuff they're age sensitive because they're changing at a high rate, 320 to 329 politics. So there's going to be more age sensitive categories versus sharks and whales. Like that's not going to be an age sensitive. So I think that's why they're broken down into those kind of odd categories, because those are the sections you definitely want within a 10-year or whatever range.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So.
What else did you notice? What other things?
Well, I'll share that, I was looking at my own data, and one of the things that I think, listening to Jenna speak about sort of this, oh my gosh, this is going to take forever feeling. I, in addition to this spreadsheet, I looked at like where I was when I first started in my library in North Shore, and I've been there 9 years now. And I can tell you that I've shaved like a year off the age of my collection. every year since I started. So it really does take a lot of time. But then just looking at this data, I was able to go to my 2020s and be like, oh, yay, I feel good about that.
Yeah.
And it just takes so much intentionality to do this work. And we are all so stretched for time that it's really difficult, but it takes I can't count the number of times I've probably made something related to collection development my professional goal. So that was a tip for maybe carving out time for that, is somehow make it your professional goal.
Absolutely. And it can be, right, small. It doesn't have to be this big giant, I'm going to do all of nonfiction, right? It can just be 500s are most frequently circulated. I'm going to dig into the 500s, right? Like you can decide. The other thing I wanted to say is that if you looked, for example, at your age titles, and like Jenna was saying, you're in your technology section, and you look and every single one of your titles is aged and out of date and inaccurate, it's better to have an empty shelf than have those books still there. Just throwing that out there. If we are putting inaccurate information, if we're putting out of date information in the hands of kids, like over time, that does damage. And we have a responsibility to, if we can't afford to, or don't have time to make something newer and more accurate available, then it's also okay to just clear that shelf off. Write a small grant to Northshore Schools Foundation specifically for that section. Buy 20 new titles, whatever it happens to be. I will put a plug out there for the Northshore Schools Foundation. Being new to the district, I didn't know that there was a history of somebody had said for a while they were telling librarians not to submit grants. And I submitted a grant in the fall and in the spring, and both were approved. And they were like, encourage librarians to apply. We love to support libraries. So I don't know if the pendulum has swung back towards libraries, but right now it seems like that's where it is. So that might be a place that you could target, right? Especially if you're writing a goal, you could target something like that. What else did you find?
Well, I've just been thinking a little bit more about the weird categories, about what's showing up.
Yeah.
And I did a bunch of weeding, and sometimes you can't get the needle to move at all.
Yeah.
But things like poetry are not included in those statistics. And you have old poetry books because there's classic poetry, or there's Where the Sidewalk Ends, I think was on your list of age titles.
Yep.
And it's like, well, that's fine. I don't feel bad about that. But that's part of why I can't get the needle to move, is I've maybe been in the wrong sections. I don't know. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, targeting a smaller section seems to move the needle quicker, right?
Yes,
But
I think
an average age is harder to move, right? I love that. Thank you for bringing that up.
I just want to also acknowledge that I'm thankful that we get the $10.
Yeah.
The $10 is like a drop in the bucket.
Yep.
Books are so expensive, and I had Colette and I were talking with Dr. Reed. This was many moons ago when we were doing the book bus. But Dr. Reed was like, books are like $30. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
And we have 850 kids, and 25 of them all want the new Dog Man.
Yeah.
That's $25. So who's like, and I write grants every year. But it's just like, I am always asking for money. So I think just baby things like you guys are saying, I just pulled all my analysis from when I first got here, and it does take a tremendous amount of weeding and money to make the needle move. So I like the idea of just starting in maybe one section.
Yeah.
I don't know. I was looking at graphic novels because our middle schoolers really, really love graphic novels, and mine are finally the average age of 2014. But I need to dig in a little more. And we have I think now we have almost 2,000 graphic novels thanks to grants, but it just takes a lot of time. And 20% of our time is admin. And some of us don't have any help, and I want to do it thoughtfully. So sometimes I think it's like I'm paralyzed. Like, what do I do? Do I throw this out? What do I do?
Yeah. And that, honestly, that's one of the things that, like, this last year, I was like, I can weed for 15 minutes after school, right? If I do 15 minutes for 1 week, I can get through 2 sections, right, of nonfiction, like setting like a small reasonable goal, like, and it's different for everybody, obviously, but I have to do it when I'm not helping teachers. I have to do it when I'm not teaching. I have to do it when I'm not planning and prepping for class. Like all of those things take priority, but the weeding is still a really important job. It's foundational for the services we provide. And so figuring out how we can continue to do that is just so important. So I love that you're all thinking about different ways in which you could do this. Any other thoughts before we move on? We got about 10 minutes left.
Quickly, I think if we want to see the needle move, because Follett breaks those categories down to age sensitive, I think you see if you weed within those age sensitive categories first, you're going to see your needle move down. I mean, I have like a lot of Sea Life books and some of them are just in bad shape, but if I sit there and spend all the time on, getting better animal books, I'm not really going to see a dent in the collection. Same with biographies or poetry. You've really got to look into the computer science, the politics and things like those things, which might even be bigger categories for middle and high school libraries versus elementary, but that's where I think the needle will move a little faster.
Yeah, targeting those aged titles.
Rebecca, can I ask one quick question?
Of course.
Is there a recommended number of items per student, like an average?
My understanding is the last time I saw was between 20 and 22 based on AASL recommendations, but they have been in the last few years, they've been a little more hesitant to make those specific recommendations because you get pushback from stakeholders that say we can't do that, or that's too much, or that's too little. And so I haven't seen anything for a little while, but 20 to 22 was kind of a target that I've worked under.
Okay, wonderful.
The other thing we talked about are $10. If you don't know, the state actually allocates to all public schools somewhere between $20 and $25 to every school district per student for library materials. Somehow it magically poofs and we don't get that once it comes to us, but that's something we can work on over time. But yes, MSOC, materials, supplies, and operating costs, there's a line item from the state for depending upon the age you're serving. There's more money there. We just don't know where it goes. Okay, so I'm going to move on just to get y'all out of here by 2:00. A little bit of information on the left-hand side here, making a plan, talking to your teacher bestie. Who do you have that can be a support to you? Who can be your cheerleader in a staff meeting when you're standing up in front of staff and explaining what's happening? Being transparent. Most non-library folks don't understand. They see a full shelf. They think that means you have everything you need. Getting to know Northshore policies for weeding and removal and disposal. I linked to those actually in the previous slide. Be kind, patient, and courteous with your custodial and office staff who are helping you get these giant boxes of weeded materials out. Some of you like to give your books, your weeded materials to classrooms. That is not a practice I would ever recommend. You're pulling them out of the library for a reason. And putting them in classrooms seems to double down on providing inadequate materials to our students. And they almost always come back to you when that teacher leaves. Or if a kid doesn't know where the book belongs, it's got your stamp on it. So it comes back to you and then you have to deal with it again. Set your goal, make a plan, and stick to it. Go ahead, trust your process. Take advantage of the colleagues you have around you. We have a great core of librarians here in Northshore. And so far, in my experience, y'all are incredibly supportive and serve to work towards the same goals. And I'm so appreciative of that. And I love that we get to do this work together and we don't have to feel so isolated. Here are just a few tips this is from Jen Lagarde. I mentioned Library Girl earlier. communicating with your community, I love the like super plain language that she uses, or accessible. I won't say plain, accessible language for people that are outside of the library world. And that includes our classroom teachers. It includes our admin, it includes our parent volunteers and our community. Out-of-date materials can be dangerous. Yeah, like really, truly, scientists do not believe HIV is transmitted through sexual content. No joke, comes from a book, right? So that's one. Out-of-date materials are often text feature poor. Jen Lagarde's a big proponent of multimodal text. And even though, for example, things like the eyewitness books are multimodal, pictures, boxes, charts and graphs, even just the spacing and the font size and type that's being used is not as accessible to our students and the readers we have today. Readers do judge books by their cover. Bad covers are harder to circulate. That's just our consumer nature. So yeah, maybe somebody mentioned, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble keeping track of names, but maybe buying newer copies of older titles, right? What's new? I just bought a newer copy of Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. That was an example. The movie was coming out. There was a new cover available. So that's one example. Books reflect the times in which they were written. I love to use the Ramona Quimby example of the fact that her family owns a Davenport. They don't change that to couch just because they made a movie. It's still a Davenport. And does that shift in, or that sign of the times, make that story less accessible to students? It does, when they struggle with words that they don't know or don't have any schema for. An old, irrelevant, and out-of-date collection sends the message that we're all of those things too. That includes sending the message to our students that we don't think they're worth it, that we don't think they deserve it, and that we don't want to invest in it. Some of you have heard maybe that what a school thinks about its library is a good indication of what it thinks of its students. And I believe that's true. When your school is willing to support in as many ways as possible the school library, they recognize that it is a hub, it is a home, it is a place for library materials, but it is a place first and foremost for our students, and everything in it needs to reflect them and their lives. So this is just an opportunity for you to think about how you might share some of this information with your staff and your community if you do take on a big weed. And with 4 minutes left, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so I can see you all. And I'm just wondering what other questions you might have, or comments, or maybe you're still staring at that data and you have something you really want to talk about.
I just want to say thank you.
Sure. You're welcome.
I should put my face
Thanks.
here.
Thanks for coming today.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you so much for your excellent presentations and just really valuable information, and your presentation method is just excellent. I really, really, really appreciate it, and hate to think that it's so unusual. So they're rare.
Thank you.
Among professional development. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, you bet. I will send out both the slides again and the video of this recording if you want to go back to it for some reason.
Could you send it to Renee as well?
Oh, yeah.
Could you put her on the mailing list for that?
Oh, I'll send it out to all librarians.
Okay, perfect.
Yep. So if you're on the distribution list for that, you'll get it. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording really